My name is Kelsey, but you can call me Kels, and you are listening to the Queer in Alberta podcast.
What's your story? What's your sign? It's like we're twin flames in a different life.
It's a boogie. It's a boogie. I love it. Welcome back to another episode of Queer in Alberta, the podcast where I talk to 2S LGBTQIA plus Albertans to share their stories. If you are new here, my name is Kelsey, but you can call me Kels. I am a queer Filipino Canadian, and I use she, her pronouns. And I live here, record this series, do it all on Treaty 7 territory in the city of Lethbridge, Alberta. Views that are expressed in all episodes of Queer in Alberta are not to be taken as indicative or representative of the entirety of the LGBTQ plus community. We are such a wonderfully diverse group of people, so the views and opinions expressed in these episodes are only indicative of myself as well as the people that I am lucky enough to chat with. But my friends, if we upload this in time, we should be right in the heart of spooky season, of Halloween. And I love it. I love it so much. I grew up in a home that I was not allowed to super celebrate Halloween. And I say it like that because we could do some things, but not others. I think I got to go trick or treating in my neighborhood growing up once or twice when I got a bit older. I remember the church that my family went to when I was young, they would do this like alternative to Halloween, which was like a Halloween carnival at the church with all these kind of games. So we would volunteer for that. At school, we were allowed to dress up, but my parents had made a decision before my brother and I were even born that when it came to Halloween, Easter, Christmas, they were going to debunk that from birth for us. It was never going to be a thing in our household, which kind of sucked. I won't lie. So now that's why, as an adult, I I love Halloween. I think it's so much fun. I love the movies. I love the costumes. So happy spooky season. Happy sweater season. I just love everything fall. I really, really do. If you love Halloween and October and the fall as much as I do, I would love to hear what your favorite Halloween movies to watch are. I will say I am not the kind of gay that loves the gore and the slasher. I like the campy, cute, spooky, like the fun. I do like the Scream movies. I think they're such a gag. They're so fun. But anything that's like, I don't know, what would be an example? Like the one with the TV and the girl who's blonde and like she sees things in the TV. You know what I'm talking about. That I don't want that. Don't tell me that. Just keep that to yourself. Thank you. Comment down below your favorite spooky movies that I need to check out. And even better, if you have some queer spooky movies, that would be so much fun. I would love to watch those. I've been told that I need to see The Craft, and I've been shamed for not knowing what The Craft is. So that's also on my list. Don't worry about it. You don't have to get mad at me. We're going to get there. We're going to get there. But this episode is so special to me. I was able to chat with Ryan Crosschild, a two-spirit individual from the Kainai Nation. And if you're unaware, the Kainai Nation is a part of the Blackfoot Confederacy, and Treaty 7 is the home to the Blackfoot Confederacy, as well as the Métis Nation Region 3 of Alberta. Ryan is such an intellectual person and so rooted in community. So I was really able to learn a lot about his experiences. He describes himself as a dreamer from a very young age and dreaming a world that he could be himself fully in. And I think it's such a beautiful story and one that I hope that resonates with a lot of Indigenous queer youth or Blackfoot youth. But I know you just want to hear the episode, so let's get to it. Without further ado, episode 5 of the Tell Us Story Hive Season 1 of Queer in Alberta that released on Optic TV featuring Ryan Crosschild from the Kainai Nation. Indigenous queer youth are valid, they are beautiful, and they have every right to self-expression and joy as anyone else in our community.
Exactly. Yep.
What's your story? What's your sign? It's like we're twin flames in a different life.
Oki Nidanigo Sikabyoku Kitopi. It's great to be here. My name is Ryan Crosschild. I'm a PhD student in the Department of Political Science at the University of Calgary. I'm Blackfoot from Kainai, also known as the Blood Tribe, born and raised in southern Alberta. Since I was a young child, I was always a daydreamer. I would have these moments where I would just kind of veer off into space, and at times it got me into trouble because I was told I wasn't paying attention. But somebody who is Indigenous, who is Blackfoot, I never fully felt like I could be my kind of authentic self in those kinds of more cultural traditional spaces due to so many things like colonialism. There's not a lot of visibility for people who identify as queer, or two-spirit is another common term that is used within Canada to refer to individuals who are gender and sexually diverse and also Indigenous. But then I also didn't feel that I could be Indigenous in some of these more quote unquote mainstream queer spaces. I didn't see representation. This daydreaming that I had as a kid, it was almost like this yearning for this otherwise world, these otherwise worlds and possibilities where I feel like I could be both and not have to uh, choose one or the other. It was a very trial and error experience, different kinds of expectations, and trying to find community, because I think that's the thing that I was really seeking, is a sense of belonging, a sense of connectedness with my community, but also as being Indigenous, Blackfoot, but also within the queer community.
Immediately, I'm struck with just like this multifaceted intersectionality in terms of your experience and identity. And like what I mean by that is there's so many parts of us, I think, like in the social bodies that you and I both occupy in this world that cannot be separate from one another. For me, being Filipina and queer, and for you being Indigenous and queer, when we only see typically cisgendered or white representation of what being queer means, it just totally gets overlooked.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think that there's an element of it where we get caught up in these ideas of authenticity, that there's an authentic way to perform
Yes.
queerness, which is quite frequently defined by typically gay white men.
Yes.
And those experiences dominate these stories, these narratives of what queer experiences should look like, and should feel like. On the other hand, there's another element of authenticity that I've had to navigate being Indigenous, that these two forms of how you're supposed to behave, how you're supposed to uh, enter into these kinds of cultural shared spaces. I was always somebody who really struggled to conform, and I think that's why, like, I was always daydreaming. So there was always that element of trying to seek this sense of freedom and liberation of being able to be both queer and Indigenous, that I think a lot of people like leave places like Southern Alberta to find elsewhere in these larger urban centers. I tried it, but I also felt this absence of connectedness um, to my territories. And so being involved in ceremony, being involved in culture was the piece that was really missing, that I was seeking out. Um, and I think that that is also something that is quite frequently missing in these more mainstream representations of kind of queer Canada. Being back in Southern Alberta, being back in
Mhm.
my home territory, is really trying to figure out, what does that look like contemporarily? What are those pre-colonial or traditional forms of
Mhm.
queerness look like for Blackfoot people? There's a lot of interest in the community here, in the Blackfoot queer community, to try and recover, reclaim a lot of those stories, those traditional forms of knowledge, the language, the terminology that we used. And um, I think that that work is important. It's a process to unlearn a lot of this stuff. And in the same way
Mhm.
with mainstream queer spaces, is that that relationship building needs to take place with Indigenous people.
When we use the term queer, does that fit for your understanding and experiences of that identity from a Blackfoot cultural perspective?
So terminology is something that I've struggled with, and it's kind of been a moving target, right? At the beginning, I didn't have any kind of sort of terminology to really ground uh, my sense of what I refer to as queer indigeneity. And aside from what was maybe talked about in pop culture when I was growing up, which was like gay, or
Yeah.
sometimes like gender queer, but that was also really rare. And
Mhm.
queer theory does feel very academic. Queerness feels like it has this association with being very white. And so one of the terms that when I was first introduced to, that I really kind of connected to, was this idea of two spirit. It's kind of an umbrella term that locates gender and sexual diversity and difference within kind of a more culturally grounded definition. But also that, to me, felt like it didn't connect as somebody who's Blackfoot, because the concept of Two-Spirit actually emerges out of the philosophies of kind of Anishinaabe and
Eastern
reflects
Canada,
more
right?
Eastern Canada, kind of is contained within that language. And so when I was doing my master's work and trying to find out what are the terminologies, the traditional terminologies that we used for Blackfoot speaking people, when we try and translate Two-Spirit, it just doesn't work.
Mhm.
It doesn't contain the uniqueness of the Blackfoot language. It just doesn't fully translate. It almost means like two ghosts, which doesn't it
Oh,
just
yeah.
doesn't have the same effect, right? That work led to more culturally specific terms. But I also struggled with those culturally specific terms, Blackfoot terms, because they were terms that were used to, like, that were designated at a particular moment in time for queer Blackfoot people. And so I don't know what it meant to embody those gender pronouns, um, because they're kind of contained within a moment in time. And so that's where I've like I'm trying to, along with some other Blackfoot individuals um, in Southern Alberta, we're trying to like grapple with like what does it mean to reclaim those identities, and it's been a work in progress, but I feel like, and so I feel like for me it's a moving target, and so I feel like queer has always been the more the concept that I gravitate towards, because it's an acknowledgement of the fluidity. That being said, there are people who are Blackfoot that also identify as Two-Spirit. It's just I don't, because of the kind of the desire to be in conversation with and to reanimate kind of more Blackfoot specific terminology.
What you're saying just so highlights the importance of like diverse representations of identity. And it's even like you're looking here at this term Two-Spirit, which I think in Canada, you're so right. A lot of people just immediately assume that that's a term that um, applies to all Indigenous peoples, wherever they're coming from, with whatever kind of queer identity and experience they're bringing to the table. But it's not a one size fits all. I just think you're doing such powerful and important work. And I know that like it's really tough because sometimes more minorities, when we get invited to have these discussions, we have one person and it's like the weight of representing the entire group is on your shoulders. And that's not at all what I want for you in this conversation. I just want to recognize that you're doing something really, really special and important.
I appreciate that, and I think that I really follow this Blackfoot teaching of Ninoganis Tsinip, which is translates to uh, kind of the way I've come to know something. It's an
Mm.
acknowledgement of the like embodied felt experiences as the basis through which I'm like conveying my perspective on something, and it's not in any way uh, trying to capture what all Blackfoot queer people are saying. This is a reflection of my own unique lived experiences.
We always say come out. Um,
Hmm.
what is this idea of like you just have this grand coming out, and it's never like that. It's a process. You're always coming out to new people, and
Never
sometimes
ending.
it's never ending, and you have to decide if it's safe for you to do so. And I think that especially in places on the prairies, you have to take seriously because it's not safe in some instances. And so um, when I finally got to that moment, I was in my finishing my first year of university. I moved back home, and I was really looking for friendship within the gay community in Lethbridge, and it was really difficult because
Hmm.
felt I thought I was going to be welcomed with open arms, and that was a rude awakening because I felt the racism, I felt the anti-Indigenous sentiment from the queer community, which like for the most part was being defined by kind of gay white men and their stories and narratives that continue to shape what the gay experience is or should be like.
I so resonate with that, like living here in Lethbridge. And
Yeah.
it's not to discount the work that like these individuals we're speaking about in Lethbridge's past and history did for gay rights and representation, but it's also just to highlight the fact that we do not exist in that same understanding of queerness and
Mhm.
feel it so clearly when we try to participate in these spaces. Like I made a friend in Victoria recently for a work conference, and she was asking me if I'd ever been to a BIPOC queer space. And I was like,
Mm.
are you joking? I don't know what that looks like, can't even
Yeah.
fathom it. And it's a totally different way of being. So yeah, I just had to speak to that because I feel it.
Yeah, we feel it, and we may not have the vocabulary or like to really fully articulate what that feels like at the moment, but it's a unique experience for somebody who for individuals who are like BIPOC, that is something that um, the mainstream kind of gay white community, they need to contend with those stories, and the ones who are really receptive have done a really good job of like making changes, especially in places like Lethbridge, to create that space for others to have
Mm-hmm.
those shared experiences, to be able to feel like we could share our stories um, without them having to be questioned or pushed back on, which I mean, I think still does exist. There is still that element of power dynamics that exist within any community, but there's gatekeepers, and there's gatekeepers for sure within the
Mm-hmm.
queer community in Lethbridge, and uh, it's trying to figure out how best to what to do with that. That's one of the reasons why you don't see a lot of well, at least for Blackfoot people, Indigenous people participating in a lot of pride events in June in Lethbridge.
If you were to maybe give advice to whether Pride organizers in different places in the province or even Lethbridge Pride about how they could make these events feel like a homecoming place for Blackfoot people or Indigenous peoples.
I think I think it's tricky, right? And I don't think there's one
Mm-hmm.
cookie cutter, like it's not a there's no one right approach. It's about again building those relationships, and that can be such a difficult thing to figure out how to do. Part of it is really trying to avoid just doing the performative like land
Tokenistic.
acknowledgement, tokenistic
Mm-hmm.
stuff, right? When people do like things like land acknowledgements, what does that really mean? Like what actionable things are there that will signal to like queer Indigenous people in Lethbridge that will show them that okay, there's changes that are being made. Like maybe this is a space that we want to like go and engage with. And that's hard sometimes to tell organizers because it puts a lot of pressure on them. But it's the same thing with when we're
Totally.
talking about reconciliation. Indigenous people, when we're talking about reconciliation, are the ones who will decide when something is acceptably worthy of saying, yeah, that is a form of reconciliation. It's hard when people are like, I appreciate all the good efforts that are going into this, but it still does not meet our requirements for wanting to go further in building something, right? And I think that that is a hard
Mm-hmm.
thing to contend with, but organizers, um, if they're genuine, will listen and hear that and say, okay, more work needs to be done, more relationship building needs
Mm-hmm.
to occur. Um, and we need to do more. Sometimes maybe it's more symbolic things, and maybe it's more practical forms of building relationship. Like it would be really nice to see a lot more interaction and engagement between the urban Indigenous community in Lethbridge and the kind of like folks who are involved at Lethbridge Pride who are wanting to do this stuff. Like during like in June to work together to host during Pride Month, but also National Indigenous Peoples Day, like to do
Mm-hmm.
something um, to to kind of create those relationships. It's also an acknowledgement, though, I would say, for the work that Blackfoot people are doing, being the majority Indigenous population in Lethbridge. Um, there's a lot of work we're also doing to build that community, to build that kind of uh, collective voice, because for a variety of reasons, like we've been disconnected from each other, but also our own kind of Blackfoot community, those cultural ceremonial spaces. And so that's what we're doing. We're doing that work, and it's messy, it's non-linear, and I think
Mm-hmm.
that that's something that people just need to be okay with. It's challenging, and it's all about relational accountability, like holding each other accountable. And for non-Indigenous people, it's like being okay with being like hearing tough feedback from
Yeah,
Indigenous.
with making mistakes, being wrong, not getting it
Exactly.
right every time, but learning from it.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah, I think I totally agree with you. And I've always thought to myself, like, as long as you create lasting, reciprocal relationships where you learn from one another and you have the opportunity for growth, that seems like the best way forward in any situation.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's a true test of like how strong relationships are is when you're able to disagree
Hmm.
with each other without having to like completely disregard the whole relationship in its entirety. And I think that
Hmm.
there's just so much work that is still needs to be done in building that relational infrastructure in places like Southern Alberta.
We've talked so much about why it's so important to think about queerness from your own cultural lens. Why would you say, in your own words, why that's so important to you?
It's important to me because it provides kind of the foundation that keeps me grounded. Um, whenever I've encountered a moment or situation that has tried to like throw me off my path, where I've encountered something really difficult, the thing that has always kept me grounded has been my kind of Blackfoot cultural teachings, the philosophies that are embedded within the language, all of those teachings that have been transferred to me, that knowledge that has been transferred to me um, by my elders, by my teachers, are what keep me grounded. And that's not to say that they're not kind of contained within complicated histories of heteronormative or patriarchal ideas. They some of them are, but they're still the things that keep me grounded to this place that is called Southern Alberta. When we talk about queerness, it's just like this idea that it's so fluid, it's so everything that becomes a
Hmm.
problem when we're talking about like indigeneity, which is very like defined through certain kinds of markers, territory. And so when you match the two, they seem like they're nonsensical, like they don't something that is queer is can be like very fluid, and indigenous is something that is really grounded, tangible. And so it's working through the tension between both. And for me, I never wanted to feel like I had to choose one or the other. And so that's why I always continuously go back to they can coexist, they can exist. That's how I am. That's who I am.
We all are on this journey of becoming unapologetically ourselves for our whole
Mhm,
identity and taking up space. And I just am
mhm,
so inspired hearing about your journey in doing that. Because even for myself, sometimes you worry about that authenticity piece that we've talked
mhm.
about so much. And am
Yep.
I enough? Am I doing this right? But I think you're just a true trailblazer that's really going to inspire a lot of people. And I wonder, for all those other maybe Blackfoot or Indigenous youth who might be daydreamers just like you, and maybe don't feel like they see themselves as queer people in their
Mhm.
culture or the world around them, what would you say to them?
Like I think that's just what it means to be indigenous is that we're
Mm,
our dreams that shared across a lot of indigenous knowledge systems is this idea of dreams being very powerful as being sources of wisdom and knowledge and not to let go of um, your desire for um, an otherwise world, something where you feel like you could be fully yourself, to continue to do that because while it may seem far off, you just continue to hold those ideas, those visions, and it almost like can be self-actualized by not letting go of that. And I think when we live in a world that is so bent on trying to destroy our ability to dream of other possibilities, like it's even more reason to continue to do it because that's what keeps us not just surviving, but wanting to thrive,
mm-hmm.
wanting to seek out that joy and pleasure that is also something that things like colonialism or what have you have tried to take away from us. So never to let go of that.
It's just affirmation, like Indigenous queer youth are valid, they are beautiful, and they have every right to self-expression and joy as anyone else in our community.
Exactly. Yep.
Ryan, I feel so privileged to have had the opportunity to chat with you today. And normally at this point in the interview, as we close, I give my guests the opportunity to share projects that they're doing or any social media that they'd like for listeners to follow them along with. Does anything come to mind for you?
I think that yeah, there's some work that I think is really important for just people in Southern Alberta to be more familiar with, which is there's a lot of work that's been happening with the Buffalo Treaty that I've been also kind of getting more involved in and thinking about what that means to rematriate buffalo in places like Southern Alberta as a almost like a queering methodology, and how that can be the source to build relationships, to think about what that means. All of this other stuff when we're talking about what queerness offers in a tangible kind of project, which is building relationship through Buffalo. Buffalo being this portal to do that work, and so I would encourage a lot of people to check that out. And there's also some other work that will be coming down the line shortly with this kind of more in lines what we were talking about, which is doing a lot more of the relationality work with kind of the queer Indigenous community in Lethbridge. So we're hoping to have some kind of exposure to what that looks like in June of 2023. So just look out for that. There's definitely momentum and desire to be more visible, to have more kind of Blackfoot people kind of showcasing and sharing their stories.
Thank you so much for tuning in and watching another episode of Queer in Alberta today. If you loved the episode and you want to see more Queer in Alberta, please feel free to subscribe or follow the podcast. Definitely leave me some notes or comments. I love seeing the feedback. And if it really truly resonated with you, I would so appreciate if you would take the time to leave a review or a star rating, no matter where you are listening from in the world today, whether it is in Alberta, in one of the small towns, the big cities, or somewhere else altogether. I really hope you are feeling loved, seen, and celebrated for who you are. I'm going to roll out the next episode of this Story Hive season. I hope you like it. Stay tuned. It's going to come up really soon. Mwah. Bye.